Kia ora everybody, my name's Steve Dixon. I'm ANZ's ESG specialist. This short presentation is about the New Zealand's first emissions reduction plan, a major plan announced in May of 2022, which looks at the plannings and the policies and the potential impacts of all the things we need to do to hit the government's targets around carbon emissions. So I'll start with where this fits in the puzzle, in the pattern of frameworks of policy and legislation for carbon mitigation and management. We'll then look at the scope and the scale of this plan. It's a huge plan. And then we'll look in three specific industries or sectors. The industry sector, so that's mostly about the GIDI fund that will be supporting them, the transport area, and then agriculture and forestry. And then finally, we'll look at implications for business. Right, so let's get into it. So the puzzle here you see is the framework for carbon management and mitigation for us as a country. And right at the top there is the legislation that sets that framework. The Zero Carbon Act was implemented in 2019. It sets up the Climate Change Commission, which is our independent reviewer. So their job is to advise the government on the direction it needs to take. And then it critiques the plans and the policies that the government puts into place. So the Climate Change Commission has a really important role. They'll be reviewing this emissions reduction plan this year and presenting those findings to the government, basically saying, look, these are the targets you've set. Well, this is how we think you're going towards them, and this is the impact we think these plans will have. On the left there, you see the emissions trading scheme. Obviously, it's our major instrument. It's the cap and trade scheme under which most of our emissions are already captured apart from agriculture. So that's had major amendments over the last couple of years as well. It now has a proper cap. It has a floor and a ceiling for the price. So the price is managed, but it's basically being managed up with the expectation that it'll be hitting sort of $130 by 2030. He Waka Eke Noa has recently been released as well. So that is the agricultural sector's plan for pricing for enabling it to hit its methane targets and its nitrous oxide targets. That's pretty much fresh off the books. There's been a lot of comment about it, but we won't be commenting much on it in this presentation. That's for another time. Then there's the adaptation planning on the right. That is the beginning of planning for the climate change impacts that are already underway, that we already know are coming. There will be more because the temperature will continue to rise. So that adaptation planning is being led by a Ministry for the Environment alongside industry and others, and we'll see more of that in the future. So that's still fledgling, but there's a lot of work to go before we kind of have a proper plan as a nation. And then there's the emissions reduction plan, which is what today's presentation is about. So let's have a look at it. It is really huge. It's 360 pages. There are 70 pages of actions alone. It's a plan over 3 years, so up to 2025, but the spend is allocated over 4 years. That's just to do with budget cycles. And the total spend is a little over $3 billion. And that's because in the budget that quickly followed the release of the emissions reduction plan, they added some extra money around supporting half price public transport and the like. So overall, we're looking at about a $3 billion spend. They had $4.5 billion available because they're taking the money from the emissions trading scheme and putting that aside as a fund to support mitigation and reduction of emissions. So there's still some money left in the kite for that. So we'll see what the government does in future budgets. The expected reductions are between 5.4 and 12 million tonnes reductions in total. So that's the equivalent of about 5 million cars travelling 10,000 kilometres each at the high end. So that's what that sort of 11.9 million tonnes represents. And as a percentage of our emissions, you'll see it's relatively minor. So this is really, getting into the reductions phase. As a nation, we've had rising emissions for many years. We've probably plateaued now, particularly with COVID. We've definitely plateaued or potentially slightly dropped in our total emissions. This is beginning to accelerate that reduction. But as we'll discuss, it's nowhere near enough. So there'll be more of these plans and stronger incentives going forward. So the plan takes a very partnership approach. They had some options as a government. They could have taken a stick approach. They could have used regulation and legislation and and banned things. Like they didn't put a ban, for instance, on new fossil fueled cars, whereas many countries in the world have banned fossil fuel cars by 2035, including the UK and lots of Europe. They didn't take that approach in general. What they've taken is the carrot approach. So they've got alongside most sectors and said, look, we're going to provide funding to support you, to incentivize you to change your behavior and begin this transition. So the biggest piece of that is the government investment in decarbonisation. Decarbonising Industry Fund, which that's why everyone calls it GIDI, because it's a mouthful. We'll talk more about that. The car social leasing scheme is a big investment of over $500 million. That's about getting the old clunkers that are driving around New Zealand with very high emissions related to the distance they travel. It's about supporting people in an equitable way to be able to get out of those cars and probably into electrics or low emissions vehicles. So we haven't seen any detail of that yet, but we expect there'll be some sort of subsidy to get those cars scrapped. The Agricultural Research Fund is another significant partnership approach that's about commercialising the variety of approaches that can be potentially taken to reduce on-farm emissions. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then that's the commercialisation of products as well. So let's just follow the money for a second, because then you'll see where the government really believes it can get bang for buck as far as getting emissions reductions. And so there's a couple of big areas. You'll see a number of things relating to transport here. Overall, the transport investment is $1.3 billion. So that's where the government can really see the potential for relatively immediate reductions, because we drive a lot of cars, we drive them too much, and the government is looking for ways to do what's called mode shift, shifting people onto buses, onto trains, onto bikes, and onto their feet. And also this thing about improving the vehicle fleet through the subsidy scheme. And also a lot of support for public transport, and clearly a lot of money going into buses and trains and so forth. In the agricultural space, there's quite a bit of spending. So forestry is receiving quite a bit of funding, as well as this commercialisation and research fund. And then there's a little bit of money which is put towards waste, which is targeting organic waste. So that's all our food waste coming out of homes primarily. There are a variety of industry schemes that are picking up a lot of hospitality waste these days, but it's very patchy as far as councils picking up organic waste. So this $100 million is about a nationwide organic waste collection that'll be established. There'll be more money needed to get it going, but this is the establishment fund to really begin to roll it out across our big metros and provincial cities. So that's where the money is, and let's have a little bit more of a look, a deep dive into particular sectors. So in the industry space, this is the GIDI fund that I've mentioned before. It's run by ECA. It's a fund of $60 million or nearly $70 million that they've been running for the last 3 years. It's proven very successful. So this is basically where the government will fund industries who are looking to transition old kit, largely coal boilers or gas boilers or diesel boilers, out of their business and move towards electric or some sort of biomass boilers. So there's often a business case that's needed to make that work, and some of those business cases aren't quite stacking up for industry right now. And so this is where the government comes alongside, and on average, they're giving you about a 36% subsidy to businesses. So what they're doing with this fund, they've multiplied it by 10, so we're now up to $690 million over 4 years, and that'll be about accelerating that fund, not only making more money available, but making it available more widely to small business as well as ultra large business. So they will approach certain sectors. I think we're talking about the dairy drying industry in particular, and they'll get alongside those businesses, and they may do some very significant investments to get rid of major coal boilers, largely down in the South Island. So this is a substitution and support fund, which will be moving big boilers out of industry as quickly as they can. There's also some funding for a roadmap for developing the use of hydrogen. There's this regulatory framework for offshore renewable energy, and there's a renewable energy strategy all being developed. So these are all roadmaps that they're setting out, basically laying the plan so that industry can see where the best and smartest investment should be over the next decade or so. We know that industry needs to see these sorts of plans before they invest big bucks in major infrastructure. So that's what the government is planning to do over the next couple of years, is to lay out those plans. hopefully with lots of conversations with the industries themselves. So let's look at agriculture. Big investment, 338 million in new research and commercialization of new products. So these are the various things like inhibitors, potentially vaccines, genetics, both in cattle and sheep. There's a variety of things that are still in the research phase, which people believe are going to enable significant methane reductions on farm, but they're not yet ready to roll out to farms. So this is an accelerator fund, if you like, to work alongside industry to make that go faster. You see $35 million there, which is on-farm support. So that's farm advisors going out to farmers now to talk about what the production possibilities are on farm immediately, rather than waiting for a series of silver bullets, actually getting out there and supporting farmers to do what they can now. Again, as I mentioned, He Waka Kanoa's got a lot to say in this space. They've sort of laid out a roadmap a little while ago, which the government is considering and will come back at the end of 22 with its response around pricing and whether they like the structures and frameworks that He Waka Kanoa have put together. So there's a lot more to come in this space, but this is the government basically putting its money where its mouth is and saying, here's some investment to make things go quicker. In the forestry space, as I've mentioned, quite a significant fund, partly to scale up native forestry planting. So that's really about gap filling. The government knows that it can't meet its targets based on what it expects to reduce through its emissions reductions plans and other projects right now. So it knows it needs some sequestration to fill that gap. This fund is about scaling up native forestry, which is permanent long-term sequestration for the nation rather than exotics, which are shorter term, sort of 25 to 30 year fast absorption sequestration, but still very short term. On climate scales, 30 years is very short term in a climate scale. And then this $90 million is some investment into forests specifically for biomass. So that's about fuel for these new boilers that industry will be switching to. I'm expecting that that's about putting trees where the new boilers need to go. So one of the issues we have is that Canterbury has a large number of coal and gas boilers that will need to be switched off in the next decade. How are they going to fuel those? One option is electricity, but heat pumps don't quite do it for high temperature water needs. So biomass is the solution there, but there aren't enough trees nearby to fuel those boilers. So I'm expecting that quite a lot of those hectares of forests for biomass will end up somewhere in the Canterbury region, but also other areas where there is patchy sources for fuel. And finally, looking at transport. So the overall target here is a 41% reduction in transport emissions by 2030. That's a big target, right? So that's really where the government believes that if you like, they can get biggest bang for buck because it's the vehicles and the trucks that have got the most manageable emissions to potentially reduce down now using existing technologies that are already being proven. So we're talking about hydrogen and electric primarily, but also shifting people out of private vehicles into public transport, walking and cycling. So what's most interesting about the transport side for me is not so much the funding, which is vast, and you can read that for yourself on the right-hand side of this slide, but it's the targets that they've set. So this is our trajectory in transport. 30% of all of the light fleet will be zero emissions vehicles by 2035. We're currently 1% of electric vehicles in the fleet. So you can see how big an ask that is in the next 13 years. Reducing total kilometres travelled by the light fleet by 20% by 2035. Again, that's this mode shift, getting people out of their cars. Cutting freight emissions by 35% by 2035. That's a significant target, and it's against some hurdles technology-wise, where it's quite slow to shift freight onto either boats or trains or into electric or hydrogen-fueled trucks. So that's going to be a slower burn, but the government is really putting a flag out there to the industry, saying this is where we need you to be by 2035. You know, a third of your emissions need to be reduced either by using biofuels or electrics or other alternative fuels, or shifting off the road, getting it onto trains and onto coastal marine. And we've already seen some investment by government in coastal marine supporting small shipping, basically from port to port around New Zealand. Zero emissions buses and the entire public transport fleet decarbonised by 2035, zero emissions buses by 2025. These are no-brainers. Electric buses are a win-win for everybody, and they're already economic, and that's why you're already seeing them across most of New Zealand's major cities. So transport's a big spend. You can see the money there. I won't read it out for you, and we've talked a little about it before already. So let's finally look at the implications overall as far as what we think this plan's doing. And working backwards, I want to reinforce the significance of the series of ERPs that we're going to see. So there's another one coming that'll probably be developed in 2023, and we'll see it maybe at the end of 2023. That will cover the years 2026 to 2030, and will be really crucial because this budget, this ERP, the best it can achieve is just under 5% of emissions reductions for the country. That's not enough. We need a significant jump, and that's what I expect this second ERP to be driving us towards. And I guess what they'll have is 3 years of experience to see where the best resources have had the biggest impact, and they'll be throwing more money that way. They'll be driving and incentivizing and reinforcing in some areas, and they may pull out of others which haven't been so successful. So watch out for this. This is only the first of many plans and policies that we'll see in this space. The other thing I'd point out is consumer preferences. So the government is emboldened to invest this degree of money into climate change mitigation because people keep telling them that it's really important. 86% of New Zealanders say we need to do more on climate change. You know, that's a reputable stat from a survey that's done annually by Kantar. And businesses are feeling this too. So clients are asking questions of businesses about how they do their business and telling both people who take surveys like Kantar, but also businesses directly, that they want to purchase based on their values. So there's a driver here that underlies all of this, which is what consumers want. And that's what businesses will ultimately respond to. They'll do things that their clients like and that their clients demand. And so that is an underlying driver for all of these changes, is actually that's what the people want. And it's particularly further up the supply chain. If you're supplying into the States or into Europe, you're already getting those questions from your buyers. So you'll be familiar with these drivers. As I mentioned, those incentives are all over the place now. So there's lots of incentives for EV switch outs. There's the GIDI fund for more significant changes, and also for smaller businesses spending, 100,000 or so. It might be possible to get GIDI money for that sort of spend as well in the near future. And finally, the price of carbon. So carbon is already embedded in our petrol and our diesel and our electricity and our gas. It'll soon be embedded by 2025 into agricultural, into the agricultural sector as well. And it's embedded in all energy intensive resources that businesses use. So as that price inevitably rises from its current $76, we're talking in May 2022, it'll rise, up to 130 by 2025 and beyond, over 200 as we head towards 2050. That is what the Climate Change Commission expects it to do. And so that is going to, again, drive changes and incentivize business to change and to begin that transition. Thank you.